I want to start with something that might sound a little bit controversial, but stick with me because it's going to change how you think about project management. Most project managers think that failure means something went wrong. They don't realize that some of the most valuable learning comes from projects that didn't finish on time, on budget, or on scope. So in this video, I'm going to break down a framework that separates true failure from valuable setbacks so you can stop beating yourself up and start building better systems. Because the truth is, you're probably being way too hard on yourself about projects that actually taught you something critical. So let me start with this distinction because it changes a lot of things. A failed project and a failed outcome are not the same thing. And I know that sounds like I'm playing with words, but this is the distinction that actually transforms how you approach your work. Think about it. You can have a project that misses its deadline or exceeds its budget or doesn't deliver the original scope, and it can still be incredibly successful if it answered a critical question or prevented a bigger failure down the line. Here's what the data shows us. According to the Project Management Institute's Pulse of the Profession report, 11% of invested capital is wasted due to poor project performance. Now that's a massive number, but here's what really matters, and this is what most people miss. Those projects still delivered learning. They still uncovered process gaps. They still revealed team capability gaps, and they exposed market assumptions that were completely wrong. And that information is worth money. It's worth a lot of money, actually. Of course, there's a caveat, and that is if people take the time to learn from the mistakes and not just record them. So let me ask you this. When your next project underperforms, and notice I didn't say fails, instead of just looking at the timeline or the budget, ask yourself these questions. Did we learn something that prevents future waste? Did we discover a market assumption that was wrong before we invested millions? Did we uncover a team capability gap that we can now address? Well, if the answer to any of these is yes, the project wasn't a failure. It was research, and research has value. The moment you reframe failure as information instead of loss, your entire approach to project management changes. So let's talk about 3 different types of project outcomes, because not all projects that miss their targets are actually failures. There are 3 distinct categories, and you need to know the difference because it changes how you respond. So here's a little story to kick this off that illustrates this perfectly. A software company took on a mobile app project, and by all the traditional metrics, it failed. So it took 40% longer than planned, it cost 50% more, and if you looked at the timeline in the budget, you'd say this was a disaster. But here's what actually happened. During that extended timeline, the team discovered something critical. Users didn't want the feature set they'd originally planned to build. Instead of shipping a product that nobody wanted on time and on budget, they pivoted. They changed direction. They built what the market actually needed. And that project, the one that failed by traditional metrics, taught them exactly what their market wanted. So the next project, which built on those insights, became their fastest growing product line. So was the first project a failure? No. It was the most valuable investment they made. And this is where the 3 types come in. Type 1 is successful delivery. You hit your targets and you deliver value, and that's straightforward. Type 2 is learning projects. You miss your targets, but you discover something critical that prevents bigger failures later. And type 3 is true failure. You miss targets and you fail to learn anything actionable. Here's the critical part. The difference between type 2 and type 3 isn't the actual outcome. It's whether you extract the insight. 2 projects can look identical on paper, but one is a learning project and one is a true failure depending on what you do with what you've learned. So after your next project wraps, I want you to do this. Categorize it. Did you deliver successfully? Great, celebrate that. Did you miss your targets but learn something that fundamentally changes your approach? That's a learning project and it has real value. Did you miss your targets and gain no insight? That's when you dig deeper. That's when you ask harder questions to find the learning you might have missed. Use the 5 whys technique to help you. Why did this fail? And with that answer, ask why, whatever's specific to that, and keep going. They call it the 5 whys because you can ask why 5 times. Make it the 4 whys or the 7 whys, whatever works for you. But figure out why. because every project sits in one of these three categories and only one of them is actually a failure. Now here's where most project managers struggle, because even when they recognize that a project was a learning project, they don't systematically extract the value. The projects that hurt the most often teach you the most, but only if you know how to extract the learning in a structured way. And most teams don't do this. They skip it, or they do it poorly, which means they repeat the same mistakes over and over again. In fact, research from Harvard Business School found something really interesting. Teams who conduct structured post-project reviews improve their estimation accuracy by 15 to 20% on subsequent projects. That's 15 to 20%. That's huge. But most teams skip this step entirely, which means they're leaving the improvement on the table. So here's another real example. A construction company. Project manager had a project that overran its timeline by 2 months. It would have been easy to just accept the loss and move on to the next job. But instead, she did something different. She mapped exactly where the delays happened. She got granular about it, and here's what she discovered. 60% of the delay came from a single process. One process, change order management. That one bottleneck was responsible for most of the delay. So on the next project, she built a completely new approval system for change orders. That one process change cut project delays by 35% across her entire portfolio. The failed project didn't just teach her one lesson, it taught her where to focus her attention, and that changed everything. So try this on the next project. Run a structured debrief within 2 weeks of project closure. Line it up ahead of time. Get the team lined up and ready. Don't wait. Do it while it's fresh. Ask 4 specific questions. Got to check that. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 specific questions. First of all, what assumptions were wrong? What did we think would happen that didn't? Second, where did we lose the most time or money? Where was the biggest drag? Third, what did we do well that we should repeat? Because not everything goes wrong. And fourth, what one process change would have made the biggest difference? If you could go back and change one thing about how you worked, what would it be? Write down the answers, and unless you're needed immediately elsewhere on another project, don't move to the next project until you've identified at least one system change you'll implement based on what you learn. Now don't stop there. Don't just identify the learning and then never use it. Don't move on to the next project and repeat the same patterns. That will keep you trapped in a cycle of repeating the same failures, because knowledge without implementation is just information. It doesn't change anything. This is the real differentiator. Here's a catchy thought. You don't rise to the level of your lessons learned, you fall to the level of your systems. And most project managers never turn insights into improved systems. They identify what went wrong, they nod their heads and agree it was a problem, and then they go back to work exactly the same way as they did before. So here's a wake-up statistic. A study by Deloitte found that 70% of organizations have a lessons learned process. 70%, but only 18% actually implement changes based on those lessons. See, the gap isn't knowledge, it's system change. People know what went wrong. They just don't change how they work. They don't embed it into their process. The difference between a team that learns and a team that repeats mistakes is actually simple. The learning team embeds their lessons into their process. They don't just remember what went wrong, they change their template. They change their approval process. They change their estimation method. They change their risk register. They change their communication cadence. They make it impossible to repeat the mistake because the system prevents it. The improved system will safeguard you. Now here's something you should do tomorrow. Go to work, block time on your calendar. Pick one lesson from your last underperforming project. That one thing that if you'd done it differently would have changed the outcome. Now you build it into your process. If the lesson is we need better scope definition early, change your kickoff template. Make it mandatory. Make it part of how every project starts. If the lesson is we didn't communicate with stakeholders enough, add a communication touch point to your project plan. Schedule it. Make it recurring. If the lesson is we missed risks because we didn't include the right people in planning, well, change who sits at the table. Invite those people to the next project. Make it the new standard. Don't just remember the lesson. Systemize it. Make it part of how you work. In the world of AI, well, if you're company compliant and you're okay to use AI on company documents, let AI review your statement of work or lessons learned database for potential risks. This is actually where real competitive advantage lives. And this is the part that separates good project managers from the great ones. It's not about avoiding failures. It's not about having perfect projects. It's about learning faster than your competition. It's about turning setbacks into fuel for improvement. So let me tell you about two competing teams. They both had projects. Go over the timeline. They both missed their targets. Team A looked at the situation and blamed external factors and moved on to the next job. Team B, they did something different. They extracted 3 specific lessons from what happened. They identified what went wrong. They asked why it mattered, and they implemented changes. And 2 years later, Team B's average project duration was 22% shorter than Team A's. 22%, and that's a massive difference. And the difference wasn't talent. It wasn't Team B had smarter people. It was how they responded to setbacks. It was their system for learning. Every failed project is a gift if you treat it as such. You've just run an expensive experiment that your competitors probably haven't run yet. You've discovered something about your process, something about your team, something about your market, or something about your estimation that you can now fix. Your competitors are still operating on assumptions. They're guessing. You're operating on data, and you've got information they don't have. So don't hide the next project that doesn't go according to plan. Document it. Share the learning with your team. Make it part of your organizational knowledge. The project that cost you time and money becomes an asset that saves you time and money on every single project that follows. And this is how you build a learning organization instead of a repeating mistakes organization. This is how you actually get better. I'm going to ask you something. Which one of these points is hitting you the hardest right now? Is it accepting that your project might have been a learning project rather than a failure? Is it the struggle of actually extracting the real learning from what happened? Or is it the challenge of building the system to make sure you don't repeat the mistake? Please drop a comment below because I want to know what's resonating with you. I read every single one, and the best responses might be featured in another video. We can all learn from what you have to offer in the comments. As always, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe because these 2 simple actions tell YouTube you receive value from this, which is important to helping the channel grow. I appreciate that you did that. And finally, what's the biggest lesson you learned from a project that didn't go according to plan? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.